What if America's Got Talent wasn't the moment Angelina Jordan's life changed, but simply the moment millions of Americans finally noticed what had already happened? Before Angelina walked onto the AGT stage, before Heidi Klum pressed the golden buzzer, and before millions of viewers discovered her name, Angelina had already spent years building a completely different life around music. She had performed on major stages, developed a unique connection to jazz and classic songs, and become an international child singing sensation. The strange part is that many people know Angelina because of AGT, even though her story had already taken several major turns before she ever arrived in America. Angelina's relationship with music began remarkably early. While most children her age were still discovering what they enjoyed, Angelina was becoming fascinated by older musical traditions. Jazz, blues, soul, and classic standards became a major part of her musical world. That choice would eventually become one of the defining features of her sound. She wasn't simply learning songs because they were popular. She was learning how to interpret them. That difference matters. A child can memorize a melody, but understanding the feeling behind a song is something else entirely. Angelina showed an unusual instinct for rhythm, phrasing, and emotional delivery, and those qualities would follow her as her career developed. Then, Norway's Got Talent changed the scale of her world. Presenter TV. Angelina appeared on the Norwegian talent show while she was still very young, and her performances immediately created a striking contrast. The audience saw a child, but heard a voice and musical approach that felt much older. She didn't need complicated tricks to get attention. Her confidence came from the way she approached the music. She could take a familiar song and make it sound personal. That helped her stand out from performers who were simply trying to show off their vocal range. And once the television audience had seen her, something much bigger was about to happen online. The internet turned Angelina's performances into something far beyond a television appearance. One of the most recognizable examples was her rendition of Fly Me to the Moon. The song was already a classic, but Angelina's interpretation gave it a completely different context. Viewers were fascinated by the combination of her age and her musical maturity. People shared the performance, reacted to it, and introduced it to friends who had never heard of Angelina before. Suddenly, a young singer from Norway was reaching audiences far outside her home country. Her voice became the reason people clicked, but her musical identity was the reason many of them stayed. That distinction became incredibly important. Viral fame can make almost anyone recognizable for a moment. It is much harder to turn that attention into a lasting career. Presenter TV had to prove that her appeal wasn't simply based on the novelty of being a child who could sing jazz. Her musical choices suggested something deeper. She wasn't abandoning the sound she loved just because modern pop was dominating the charts. Instead, she continued exploring the traditions that inspired her. That gave her something many young viral performers struggle to develop: a recognizable identity. But being recognized as a child prodigy also creates a strange problem. The audience can become attached to the version of you that first made them emotional. They remember how old you were. They remember the little girl standing behind the microphone. They remember the performance that made them stop scrolling. Then you grow up, and suddenly the same audience expects you to somehow remain the person they remember. Angelina couldn't do that. Her voice would mature, her personality would change, her musical ambitions would evolve. The challenge was no longer simply proving that she was talented. It was discovering who she wanted to become. And that is where Angelina's story becomes more complicated than a typical talent show success story. Her early fame came before the biggest American stage. She already had experience performing in front of audiences. She already knew what it felt like to have strangers discuss her voice. She already understood that people were watching her career develop. So, when she eventually appeared on America's Got Talent, The Champions, she wasn't arriving as a completely unknown teenager hoping for a miracle. She was arriving with years of history behind her. At 13, Angelina faced a completely different kind of pressure. AGT The Champions brought together performers who already had stories of their own. Many had competed on talent shows. Many had already built international audiences. Angelina had to show that her earlier success was not simply a childhood phenomenon. Then came her song choice, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. It was a dangerous choice because almost everyone already knew the original. Freddie Mercury's performance is legendary, and trying to reproduce it would have been almost impossible. Angelina didn't try. Instead, she slowed the song down and transformed it into her own interpretation. The result was less about copying Queen and more about showing how Angelina heard the song. That decision revealed how much she had developed since her earliest viral performances. She wasn't just a young singer with an unusual voice anymore. She was becoming an interpreter with a point of view. And then, Heidi Klum pressed the golden buzzer. For many people, that was the moment Angelina Jordan became a major name in the American talent show world. But if you look closely, the golden buzzer was almost the opposite of a beginning. It was a confirmation. Angelina had already spent years developing the qualities that made that performance work. The golden buzzer simply gave those qualities another enormous audience. And this is where many stories about Angelina stop too early. They show the child performer, they show the viral videos, they show the golden buzzer. Then they move on. But the more interesting question is, what happens when the cameras stop focusing on the fact that she is young? Because eventually, being a child prodigy stops being enough. Angelina has had to move towards something much harder, becoming an artist whose work can stand on its own. That transition requires patience. It means experimenting with music. It means developing original material. It means figuring out which influences belong in your sound and which ones should remain behind you. It also means accepting that not every listener will love every change. Some fans will always prefer the young Angelina singing classic standards. Others will be more interested in the artist she's becoming. That tension is almost unavoidable for anyone who becomes famous at a very young age. What makes Angelina's journey especially interesting is that her early success was built on something that cannot easily be manufactured. She had taste, she had curiosity, she had a clear attraction to music that gave her room to express emotion. And instead of simply chasing the next viral moment, she had to keep developing that foundation.
That is a much slower process than becoming famous from one performance, but it is also far more valuable. Think about what changed before AGT. Angelina went from a very young child exploring music to a performer recognized internationally. She learned how to stand on a stage. She learned how to interpret songs in front of large audiences. She experienced the strange world of becoming recognizable while still growing up. She developed a musical style that people could identify. And by the time America's Got Talent entered the story, she already had something many contestants were still searching for: a sense of who she was as a performer. That is why AGT should not be viewed as the event that created Angelina Jordan. It was the event that introduced another enormous audience to an artist who had already been developing for years. The golden buzzer was spectacular, but the preparation behind it was much less glamorous. It was built through countless hours of music, performance, experimentation, and growth. And there is a bigger lesson hidden inside her journey. Talent can open a door, but it cannot decide what happens after you walk through it. Angelina's early voice got people's attention. Her musical choices made them curious. Her performances gave them something to remember. But longevity requires something different. It requires the ability to evolve without losing your identity. That may ultimately be the most important part of Angelina Jordan's story.
The world first noticed her because she was extraordinarily young and extraordinarily talented. America later watched her earn a golden buzzer. But neither moment tells us where her career will ultimately go. Those are milestones. They are not the destination. So, before America's Got Talent ever knew Angelina Jordan's name, music had already changed her life. It had taken a young girl from Norway and placed her on international stages. It had introduced her to millions of strangers. It had given her an identity long before she was old enough to fully understand what that identity meant. And when she finally stepped on to the AGT stage, she wasn't starting from zero. She was bringing an entire musical journey with her. The golden buzzer may be the moment many American viewers remember most, but the real story began much earlier. Angelina Jordan didn't become interesting because AGT discovered her. AGT became another chapter because Angelina had already become interesting. And now the question is no longer how a young girl managed to sound so extraordinary. The question is, what happens when that young girl keeps growing, keeps experimenting, and finally gets to decide for herself what kind of artist she wants to be?